All right, we're going to get started. Thank you so much for coming to the first breakout session, which is Opportunities on the Farm and Garden. My name is Kellyanne Blazik, and I'll be moderating this panel. I work on agriculture and food issues, including food waste, for Congresswoman Shelley Pingree, and so it's really exciting to see you all here. We talk about this all the time on the Hill these days in our office, so I've worked with many of you, and it's great to see new faces. I actually worked here at the Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinic before moving to DC, so it's especially great to be back for this conference and for this panel. So I know we're running a little bit behind schedule, so I'm going to kick things off right away and send it back to our panelists to introduce themselves and their organizations and their work on food waste, and then we're going to leave a bunch of time for you guys to ask questions during a Q&A session. So first up will be Joanne from NRDC.
Great. Thanks, everybody. It's so nice to be here. My name is Joanne Berkenkamp. As Kellyanne mentioned, I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, but I'm also here with a second hat today, and that is that I created an initiative called Beyond Beauty that deals with imperfect produce on farms and what happens to it and the potential for market development for it. So I'm going to talk about that as well. So I thought I'd start off and just give you a quick introduction to NRDC. So here's our mission. We work to safeguard the earth, its people and planets and animals, and the natural systems on which all life depends. And you can see here some of the areas that we focus on. Climate change is our signature issue. We have an extensive related program on energy efficiency and renewables. We have an extensive program focused on health and the environmental consequences of various sorts of issues on human health, food and agriculture, oceans, fresh water, wildlands, various other elements. So we work mostly in the United States and a little bit as well in China and India. We work on a number of fronts through our food waste program, which was started 4 or 5 years ago by my colleague Dana Gunders, and you'll hear from Dana and several other panels this week. So we work on a number of areas, and the levers for change that we mainly focus on are these four. The food industry, for instance, we've been very involved in the ReFed initiative that developed this roadmap for what the food industry can do to reduce food waste over the coming 10-year period. If you haven't seen the ReFed research, check it out at refed.com. It's a really fantastic characterization of where we need to go. We also work on policy issues with Shelley Pingree's office and many others to support innovative policy change, mainly at the federal level. We do a little bit state and local as well. We're increasingly involved in cities as levers for change. Cities typically have significant food waste challenges around waste management and are also in direct conversation with their communities about issues like hunger and food insecurity. So we have been involved deeply in Nashville, Tennessee for the last year. That's the first place we've really done a deep dive. And we recently started to work in New York City, and just a few weeks ago chose Denver, Colorado as our third city. So you'll hear more about that from us in the next couple of years. And then lastly, public education. And I think, as many of you know, consumers represent about 43% of the waste that happens in the United States. Consumers are really critical, and so we focus in particular on this issue of public education through our new SaveTheFood.com Ad Council campaign. Just started on April 20th. It'll be nationwide. It will run for several years, and it includes a number of key campaign assets, which include things like TV ads. You may have seen the video, or if you haven't, you probably will see it at this conference, the video of the strawberry growing up in the field and being transported and packaged and shelved and going to the grocery store and then being purchased and landing in the trash in someone's home because it wasn't eaten before it turned bad. So that's the first TV spot that will come out. And then there are a whole set of other materials for the web, out of home, like billboards and bus stops, things that can be put on trash hauling trucks, a range of print resources, a lot of social media resources. We particularly heard from municipalities that it's easy to communicate through social media and it's low cost for them. So we've got a strong social media component, and then also an interactive website for consumers. So this is a very big tent approach. Ad council campaigns, we put in several $1 million. The ad industry provides a match to buy TV spots and that kind of thing, but then the rest of it is all through partnerships. So schools, colleges, faith groups, food industry folks, municipalities, states, others that want to participate. So it's very much an open door for participation, and we welcome everybody to be a part of this in whatever way suits you. So just check out savethefood.com. So what I'm really here to talk with you about today is this work I've been doing separately from NRDC through my consulting firm, Tomorrow's Table, and the Real Food Challenge, which is a nonprofit that works around the country with colleges to support food that is more sustainable and regionally grown in college contexts. And we developed this initiative called Beyond Beauty. And the purpose is really to look at this question of imperfect fruits and vegetables, right? And it was referenced this morning to this very large, although not very well documented, volume of produce that never makes it off farms across the country because it's too big or too small, or it's misshapen, or the zucchini has a little superficial scarring, that kind of thing. It's not perfect enough to go to grocery. So what we see in the United States is that typically that kind of product lacks a market, and so a lot of it just gets plowed under. In fact, we are focusing in Minnesota, where I'm based. I live in Minneapolis, and we found that about 75% of the imperfect produce that's grown on our fruit and vegetable farms either gets plowed under or is otherwise not making it to market, right? Sometimes it's used for animal feed, but mostly it's plowed under or composted. There's a very small portion that's actually getting to market. A small portion also is donated. So our growers are investing in growing this food, and they lack a market for it. And so we started looking at the potential for market development through college food service. So I created some partnerships with Aramark, Sodexo, and Bon Appetit, and 5 of the college campuses where they provide food service in Minnesota. We did a lot of research with farmers on how they view this issue, interviews, survey work. We talk with distributors and fresh cut processors about how they look at it, and then we talk with the major 3 food service management companies that are operating in the state to really understand how they look at it and the potential for market development in those areas. And we found some really interesting things, which I will tell you about later. So Gary, do you want to come on up? I believe you're next.
No, I think
Ben? Okay, great. All right, and I will leave it there. Thank you.
I'm not the next slide. Should we have?
Is it mine?
No, it's Doug.
All right, whatever.
Yeah, we'll do it. Yeah, we'll mix up in the order here.
Next will be Duck, actually.
Hey, everybody, I'm Duck Caldwell. I'm the director of the Boston Area Gleaners. There we are. Boston Area Gleaners started as the Boston Area Farm Gleaning Project in 2004. Just to give you a little history first, our founder, Oaks Plimpton, started building relationships with local farms. He did a lot of work locally, just in the local agriculture in general, and had always noticed the amount of food that was left on farms. And when he retired, he decided to start a brand new effort, which was farm gleaning. We became incorporated as a nonprofit in 2007, and we did not have employees until 2010. We were focused solely on farm gleaning. In our formative years, we did delve into retail rescue and farmers market rescue as other organizations locally began to expand and emerge. Say, for example, FoodLink, represented over here, and Food for Free, not in the room. We passed off that work we had taken on to them so that we could focus solely on farm food rescue. So our mission, we were extremely focused in our work. We were focused on capturing volume off of farms. So we're dedicated to rescuing surplus farm crops for people in need. That's our mission statement. And all of this food is donated, and we work primarily with the charitable food system in order to get that distribution done in the Boston area. We deliver the food to, let me get to the, I'll get to the supply chain slide first. So our organization has recently, we have Our mission is very clear, and we've structured it as one program in the past, but as our volumes increased over time, last year we gleaned over 364,000 pounds across 64 varieties of produce. We decided we needed to divide our program into two, and so we have a distribution program and a gleaning program, and our gleaning program manager, Mr. Dylan Fraser, is here sitting in front. If you want to talk to him more about the specifics of operations later. We have over 1,500 volunteers on our gleaning alert list, 3 field staff, 1 development assistant, and myself as staff. So we have 5 total staff. We have a 10-member board of directors, and our budget is just under $300,000, just to give you an idea of what our organization looks like at this time. So here's how the supply chain works. As I say, we're focused solely on farm food. So our work is largely reactive. Farmers call us, and then we put the wheels in motion to retrieve the food that's available. We then mobilize our volunteers. We have, via our website, a online volunteer management system. It's called GleanWeb. I'd be happy to talk further about that for anybody who's interested. Developed by a gentleman out of Salem Harvest, Dick Yates, who worked with us to customize that tool specifically for Boston area gleaners. So our version of GleanWeb doesn't really look like anybody else's, which also points to the kind of the way that gleaning has to be customized per region in any area of the country or even in a state, just based on the geography, farm size, farmer sensitivity to encroachment, transportation methods, population density. All of that has to come into play if you're looking at starting gleaning with volunteers. Our staff manages those volunteers in the field, so no gleaning trips occur without staff management. That piece is key. Farmers are really the gatekeepers to this gold mine of nutrition that's still available on farm fields. Up to 20%, this is anecdotal, the data that I'm giving you, that our farmers have told us. Up to 20% of what they plant on an annual basis is never harvested. That can vary annually just based on what happens seasonally. Last year we actually had one orchard owner donate the entire orchard to Boston area gleaners, and that was just basically because the apple harvest was so huge that it wasn't worth it for him to even wholesale that. So that's an example of a much larger amount than 20%. Our staff then provides cold storage. We either transport it to our cold storage, we do keep an inventory now, or we deliver directly to our distribution partners, which include Food for Free and Greater Boston Food Bank, who further distribute out to a network of over 500 agencies across eastern Massachusetts. And so our reach is, thanks to those distribution partners and that type of collaboration, much farther than we could actually afford to do. We do some distribution to pantries and agencies that are geographically closer to where our office is in Waltham, Massachusetts. So we've really built the entire thing out just really focused on volume and efficiencies in distribution. That's really been the key to all of the work that the entire way we've built the organization thus far. So this is looking at, since our incorporation in 2007, the pounds that have been recovered. We've had exponential growth over the past 3 years. This is thanks to some generous grants that we've received. That's been great. The problem with it is with that type of sudden growth, which I have been able to prove that applying resources in the form of capital or operating funds leads directly to more food recovery. I mean, that's exactly what happens. But the problem is, of course, sustaining funding over the long term. And so we're focused more on building up the organization just as a nonprofit business and being able to sustain ourselves for the long term, because the goal here is to build the supply chain in perpetuity. My hope is that food banks eventually want to put themselves out of business, but this surplus supply chain can be utilized, yes, for charity and for people who really need it, but my hope is that eventually other opportunities can be realized through the tremendous amount of surplus that's available. Last year we worked with 54 farms. There are over 1,000 farms across eastern and central Massachusetts. So the potential is huge, and I think there's a great potential for workforce development opportunities with the surplus, and just new business entrepreneurship for in communities that really need that type of economic growth. You have any timing? That's probably good. Okay, thank you.
And now we have Ben from Imperfect Produce.
Hey, how's everyone doing today? Good. All right, it's morning. All right. I'm Ben. I'm with Imperfect Produce, and what we do is pretty simple. We take kind of the ugly and imperfect produce, as Joanne was talking about, and we sell it to consumers for 30% less than you can find at a grocery store. So it's a way to give farmers income. It's a way to help reduce methane emissions, and it's a way to help people get affordable, fresh, nutritious produce. So to go back a little bit to how we started, we were running a nonprofit called the Food Recovery Network about 4 years ago, which is, it started as an idea. We had students recovering prepared foods from college dining halls at the end of the day that were going to waste, and we said, why don't we connect this with people in need at meal sites and homeless shelters? And so we started that about 4 years ago at 2 colleges on the East Coast, and scaled it. It's now, I think, at 185 colleges across the country, the largest student movement against hunger in the U.S. There you go. Thank you. And along the way, we started thinking, how can we have a sustainable business model around wasted food? And we said, we talked about the CSA model, and we always thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could do a recovered CSA? But it didn't really work with prepared food. We were getting like pasta and lasagna, and it was because of health regulations, really couldn't be reselling that. And so we started talking to our advisors, including Tristan, who's on his phone in the back there. All right. And he and a lot of others said, no one's talking about it yet, but you have to look at the farm level because there's huge amounts of waste there. And as different people have already alluded to, we're talking about 20% of the produce grown in the U.S., and so that amounts to 6 billion pounds of produce every year in American farms that never make it to a human mouth. And that's a shame for the farmer because they put all the work into it. It's a shame for all the water, especially in California where we live. And so we started thinking, okay, how can we get at this? And so we had the idea for about 2 years and couldn't find the right supply chain, and finally teamed up with somebody named Ron Clark on the West Coast. Thanks actually also to Tristan and some other people. Ron was sourcing ugly produce. He's kind of the godfather of ugly produce, and was sourcing this from the farms in California for the California food banks. And we're talking like 100 to 150 million pounds a year of produce, where he would work with the farms to find the produce they couldn't sell and use the infrastructure and the labor that was already there, and then pay the farmers to donate it or to buy it at a reduced cost for the food bank. And he was retired and was looking kind of for a new business model. And so out of that, Imperfect Produce was born. I'm still on that last slide. We started with our first business model about 10 months ago in the Bay Area. And so what it is, basically, we source produce from California farmers, and California grows half the food in the country. So we are lucky enough to have a year-round supply. And a lot of this produce, Joanne alluded to it, to, you would never be able to tell that it was imperfect. Like, I know Jordan over there in the back, and we as well love to play up the wonky looking carrot, or the, that looks like, a pair of legs, or the pepper that looks like it's, super deformed and a smiley face. But to be honest, like 99% of this produce is getting rejected for the smallest reason. So like, if you think about cherries, for example, they take like I think like a 6-inch tray, and however many cherries you can fit in that tray is the sizing. So it could be 8, it could be 9, it could be 10, it could be 11, it could be 12. And retailers will say, we're only going to take 6 and 7s. If they're 8s and 9s, we won't take it because it's a little bit too small. And so that stuff goes to a variety of places. Some of it's donated, but the majority of it either ends up in animal feed or compost or on a landfill, or even just gets left out in the fields kind of to rot and turn back into soil, which is good, but not as good as being fed to a human. And so when we started learning about this, we were amazed. And so what we do is we basically pay the farmers some income to either go out and harvest the produce for us, or to for some products that are packed in a shed, it's already sorted out into bins. And so we basically buy the bins of the culls and the sort outs from them. And then we offer a home delivery service in the Bay Area. So it's very similar to CSA. It's a fully customizable box of produce that you can get delivered to your door every week or every other week. We have organic, we have conventional, and it's all produce that would have normally gone to waste, and it's all about 30% less than you could find in a grocery store. So if you look at some of this, these are carrots that are just like too skinny. You see they're not uniform shape, not uniform size. They towards the end, they're really skinny tails, but really fat heads. Stuff like this, there wouldn't be a market for, and so we're able to get this. We're able to source plums for 2 cents a pound, and it's still more than they're getting for animal feed or for compost. And so we've loved to play up the branding. It's our marketing team is basically just consists of one person and a bag of googly eyes, and you can pretty much do anything you want with that. It's been really fun. The public has been really. It's actually been amazing how easy it's been to get the public to on board with adopting Ugly Produce, especially when you have the cost savings, you have the environmental mission. It's really just a question of logistics and seeing how we can scale it. So basically, we're in the Bay Area now. We're scaling across California by the end of the year. Hope to be in Boston, New York within 3 or 4 years once we can get the supply chain figured out. So you can look forward to some Ugly Produce at some point in your life. Thank you.
And now we have Teresa from Salvation Farms.
Well, thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be on this panel and to be among all of you, and also the group that met yesterday. Pretty inspiring stuff we're talking about. So I am Teresa Snow. I'm the founding director of Salvation Farms. We're a nonprofit organization that grew out of work that I guess I saw a need for in my community in north central Vermont. We are a nonprofit. Our mission is to build increased resilience in Vermont's food system through managing agricultural surplus. Very jargony. But basically, it's building more strength in our regional food system, decreasing the dependence on food from afar by managing resources that are right in our community and should be accessed by our community. We are driven by 3 primary goals. One is to reduce food loss on farms. The other is to increase the use of locally grown foods. And the third is to build increased appreciation for our state's agricultural heritage and future. We're really driven by this sense of responsibility for sustainable agriculture, natural resource management, and experiential learning opportunities. So engaging people in the process is key, because people are the ones that make change. And the only reason people make change is because they have opportunities to reflect on behaviors in their culture. So people often ask about Salvation Farms. Why Salvation Farms? Where is our farm? Are we religious? And I say, well, we're neither, but we're not biased. The name Salvation Farms really encompasses what we believe farms are. They are our salvation. They always were, and they always will be. And we believe that small, diversified farms are the centerpieces and cornerstones of a healthy wholesome and stable community. So what is our specific niche in the food system in Vermont? Well, we engage cross-sector partners, utilizing available skills, resources, and knowledge to manage available farm foods in a way that does increase the state's independence. We're looking at systems integration and not creating an Uber organization. We eventually do think, like it was said, if food banks weren't needed, I don't think Salvation Farms is needed. Managing farm surplus at a state level can be done if players just align in the right way. There doesn't have to be a facilitator of this work on a grand scale. So we take this approach on a micro surplus management and a macro surplus management. Micro is gleaning, macro is aggregation, cleaning, minimal processing, and a broader distribution. I'll get into those in a minute. And we want to serve both charitable and institutional food systems in the state. We believe that there's a great advantage of providing farm surplus to the charitable food system, but we think that there's an incredible lever by making farm surplus food also available to institutions. Those institutions being schools, hospitals, nursing homes, veterans homes, prisons. They're investing large amounts of dollars on food sourced from out of state for the purpose of providing meals. And those institutions are as financially insecure, nutritionally insecure as some of the individuals that are sourcing from charitable food system sites. So our hope is that we create a new model similar to a wholesale distribution model in Vermont that is credible, reputable, that farmers trust, rely on, and depend on, much like they do a wholesale distribution or distributor system. So I'm proud to say I believe Salvation Farms is the first state to have done a food loss on farm study. And out of that came, obviously, the need for more research, as what happens with research. We broadcast a survey to farmers around our state. We received 58 completed surveys, which is a really small sample size. It represents 13 of our state's 14 counties. But what we discovered was that 14.3 million pounds of food was left on farms, not accessed or available to our communities. And 14.3 million pounds is a hard number. We used to say 2 million pounds because it was a safe estimate. So 14.3 we describe as 7,000 pickup trucks. It's like the average farm pickup truck. That's a line of pickup trucks 26 miles long. Isn't that a marathon? Has anybody ever ran a marathon? So imagine if you were running alongside like produce the entire time. Like that's how much food is being left on Vermont farms. And primarily that food is 32% is left in the field, considered wholesome and edible. 68% is already picked and either in storage, cold from the wash pack line, or coming back from market. I don't know what my time is. Okay. Oh gosh, I have a lot more. I would say that, oh gosh, I have a lot more. So the micro macros, the Gleaning Collective, we're working as a backbone organization with a network of autonomous gleaning groups, and we're trying to build a collective impact approach where we have shared values, shared measures, both qualitative and quantitative, track data crop specific from farm source to distribution site, regarding what is Vermont capturing, what is the potential to be proactive and prepared, what regions are producing what crops at what time, and what regions need crops at what time, and can we move that food efficiently. We have an operations manual. We have a website for registering volunteers as well as tracking all of our data for having farms sign up, sites sign up to be involved. We really want to build gleaning in a way that's reputable, professional, and accountable so that farmers trust when they contact gleaners that they're actually getting service providers that are coming to their farm. The Vermont Commodity Program is our response to the need to actually clean, aggregate, and minimally process food on the statewide level. We've piloted this concept in 6 different locations, partner locations, from institutions of higher ed to incubator food hub kitchens to correctional facilities. And we're about to launch the program in our own leased facility. We think there's a great opportunity here, much like Feeding America says, of like, how do we get food to a central location when it's too much for one site to absorb or for a region to distribute, for an aggregated point, breaking down, case packing, and easy integration into institutions and charitable food systems. Plus, you can build a skilled workforce that can either go into the food system at multiple sectors or into manufacturing. So I guess I'll leave it there.
And now we have Gary from Ample Harvest.
All right. I'm in that enviable position of being the last person between you and lunch. I also have a lot to say, not a lot of time to say it. Fortunately, I am a native New Yorker, and I can talk fast once we get the computer hooked up. Did it come up? Give me one. Is it up? Please, this worked before. Is it in? Okay, excellent. Okie dokie. Now let me get this running. We're good. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Quick question, first show of hands. How many of you are or have somebody in your family who's a home or community gardener? Raise your hands. Great. Take a moment, hold the hands back up just for a second. Take a look at how many hands are up. This is really, really, really important. Okay, keep that in your mind. AmpleHarvest.org is a nationwide nonprofit that's focused on not the farm-to-table food waste you've been hearing about, but the food waste you've never heard about. And that's the waste of food that happens in 42 million home and community gardens. We've all heard about the ReFed, the NRDC, USDA, and the other studies on food waste, but no one ever talked about you guys, the gardeners. There are 42 million of us in the country. That's 35% of all households, including many in the urban environment where you wouldn't think there's a whole lot of gardening taking place. So this is what food waste looks like. It happens in home and community gardens. It happens in rooftop gardens, in container gardens. And we've always overlooked it. I'm sure you've all heard about people begging somebody to take tomatoes or zucchini because they had way too much. Gardeners have been forced to waste that excess food, but the really important question is why. And this one phrase, I think, has been an important contributor to hunger and malnutrition in America, and it's because we've been told that food drives, jars, cans, boxes, no fresh food. We've all been told we can't donate fresh food, so either we eat it, we force it on a neighbor, or we compost it. Think about that for a moment. This is not a farm-to-table. This is our backyards now. The reason for that is very simple, because typically the time it takes for food to travel from a food drive through the food bank network to a food pantry, that red line there can be days or weeks, which is just fine for jars and cans and boxes, but it doesn't work for fresh food, which has a much shorter shelf life. It's a choke point in the entire food distribution system. The result is that those of us who are gardeners have been basically throwing that food away. And that's a terrible loss because that's local food, freshly harvested, typically organically grown, and it's in the community where it's most needed. What I had realized in 2009, and I will admit that I'm an aging geek and I'm also a master gardener, is that the problem could be solved with information and technology. AmpleHarvest.org was launched in 2009 to tell gardeners, yes, you can donate food, that's education and awareness, and to build a search engine of food pantries eager and willing to take the food. And once in place, gardeners would not only know that they could donate that food, but then they could come to a website, find a food pantry in their neighborhood that wants the food, and donate it. And oh, by the way, donate it on a day of the week and the time when the pantry needs it, just before the clients come in, which alleviates their concern about refrigeration and storage. It was a just-in-time inventory logic. The question you're often asked in the food waste realm, in the food hunger realm as well, how much food? And I think that when you're discussing food waste, the how much food is not the real question when you're solving it. I think the problem should be thought about differently. I want you to visualize a funnel that's about 9-mile radius, that's 250 square miles, and all the gardens and gardeners in that range funneling their food down to a food pantry. That's the opportunity that we should be looking at. So this is a picture of where we are in Cambridge. That circle is about 250 square miles, and you can use your imagination to figure out how many people are gardening in that particular area and all the food that can then funnel to a single pantry. So it launched in May of 2009, and it took off very, very fast. As a matter of fact, there were 1,000 participating food pantries in the first 150 days, which just happened to be World Food Day. Pure coincidence. Today, nearly 8,000 food pantries in all 50 states are a part of ampleharvest.org and growing. While I was sitting here, a food pantry in San Antonio, Texas, and one in Wintersport, Maine signed up. So it continues to grow as pantries say, we want in, this is really, really important to us. And then the gardeners are writing back saying, this is great. This one gardener had written, let's see, last year I threw away 2 55-gallon drums of lemons, 4 of grapefruit, and 2 of our. Think of how much food is in a 55-gallon drum. Not all of us are throwing away that much. But it begs a question of how much food is there? Last year, in 2015, we did a study looking back at 2014. We asked gardeners across America, well, how much food, more food did you grow than you can use? And the reality was we didn't believe the numbers ourselves. So we did the survey again this year with 3 times the sampling, over almost 1,900 gardeners. And here's some of the data that we learned. 94% of the gardeners are growing food. By the way, as you can imagine, tomatoes is what they grow the most of. 83% of the gardeners said they want to donate. The reason on these you're going to see 2 different scales is that's last year's and this year's, but you're going to see that the data validates. In other words, it was a good sampling that was done. 83% of the gardeners want to donate. More than half of 42 million gardeners, 21 million gardeners are willing and able to donate food. And by the way, 68% of them would actually grow more food if they knew they could donate the food. The loss, this is from this year's data, and the data is still being analyzed. I got the latest update from the 2 professors and the Cisco statistician looking at it. So these numbers are maybe going to change slightly, but we're looking at over 11 billion pounds of food a year lost in gardens. That has just changed the national food loss statistics, unfortunately, upward. I'm sorry? Sorry? Okay, I'm going to move ahead very quickly. The last thing I want to quickly talk about, this is one slide up. So why am I showing you this slide? 70% of the pantries in America are in a house of worship. You just heard Doug say we had a major awareness problem. Ampleharvest.org is launching, in partnership with Green Faith, an initiative for the weekend of September 23, 4, and 5 of this year, Food Waste Weekend. We are putting the resources together in a faith format for clergy across America, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, and Unitarian, to speak to their congregants on that weekend about food waste, on what we're talking about here and what they can individually do. We're going to be formally announcing this in about 2 weeks. This is a sort of save the date for everybody, but the idea is that while we've been talking to each other, and I have lots of familiar faces here, really, we need to get to a much larger number of people. This will boost ampleharvest.org's work immensely. It'll boost everybody's work immensely by simply going to the one community in this country who hasn't been involved yet, which is the faith community. And so I hope you'll put this in your calendar and you'll be keeping an eye out for the press announcement. Thank you.
So I just have a few questions for some of our panelists, and then I'll open it up to the audience. I wanted to touch on something that Teresa mentioned, which is data and measurement. I think as we've been looking at federal policy solutions, particularly around the farm level, it's been really challenging because of the lack of data and the lack of really great on-farm measurement tools. And so I was wondering, do you have any suggestions for that based on your research and experience in Vermont?
Yeah, and I'll follow up that our research is actually on the homepage of our website, so there's a link to that, and it actually indicates that we need a longer-term, more engaged, kind of comprehensive way to measure with farms to get a true baseline. And so that would be really on-farm observations by an outside team, trusted team by the farms, as well as the farms being perhaps compensated for time to actually keep different records, and possibly even have it be part of the census. Wouldn't hurt.
Great, thank you. And then to kick it back to Joanne, I'd love to hear more about your research and specifically on what you learned from farmers' perspectives on food waste and perfect produce.
Thank you. So as I mentioned with the Beyond Beauty, we were really taking kind of a multi-pronged approach to connect the dots between farmers, distributors, and fresh cut processors, and the food service industry, particularly in colleges. And we focused that way because in food service environments, nearly all of the food is going to get cut, and a lot of it is going to be cooked. And so appearance is somewhat less important. It's a little bit different than retail, as Ben had talked about. So on the farm side, we did a survey of Minnesota growers who produce fruits and vegetables, and then we also did a set of very in-depth interviews with farms of all sizes. Big farms in our neck of the woods are probably 1,000 acres, which is very different than your circumstances, maybe a little bit more like Vermont. And then we have folks who are organic, we have folks who are conventional, and so forth. And so we found over 80% of the farmers that we surveyed said that they were either moderately or very interested in finding markets, paying markets for their imperfect products. We only found about 5% who said they already had sufficient markets for their imperfects. CSA growers, we found, tend to be the folks who have the strongest markets because their customers tend to be most open to product that might not look right. But for folks who are wholesaling, selling into retail, selling into food service, they are not able to sell that market by and large, sell that product. And there are a number of reasons for that. We asked what the barriers were to them. We found the number one barrier was the lack of a paying market. We asked about things like labor. And I had thought, maybe growers would say, we just don't have the laborers at harvest time. We've got to put the people that we have into harvesting number one product. We're just too busy. And I really didn't hear that. At least where we are, labor was not that big a deal. It really is the issue of a lack of a market. And it's interesting because even in the Twin Cities, we are fortunate to have the largest concentration in the United States of natural food grocery cooperatives. They're very committed to local agriculture, to organic agriculture, to educating their consumers. And even the co-ops won't handle imperfect product. So we really started thinking about, okay, what do we do about this? And folks often say, why can't farmers just get it processed? In Minnesota, we're, I think, the largest, along with Wisconsin, in terms of the processing of green beans, sweet beans, carrots, and sweet corn. Karen Hanner made reference to some of the processing work that goes on through, Green Giant and others like that. But those markets are not available to farms that grow for the fresh market, right? All that product is contracted. The acreage tends to be quite large. Those plants are full. You can't just take surplus fresh market product and get it into a Green Giant plant in August. So we really started looking at food service as a strategy for ways that farmers could potentially sell that product. And what we found, and we can talk about this if we have a little more time, is that the door among Aramark, Sodexo, and Bon Appetit accounts that we talked to, the door was much more open than we had expected. There was a real willingness to look at this product, and somebody like Bon Appetit already uses a lot of it through their Farm to Fork program that focuses on local sourcing within 150 miles. So the word was actually quite encouraging for us. The real caveat I see, the thing that worries me a little bit, having delved into this more deeply, is could you run into a situation where large buyers in the food service sector would become so enamored of getting imperfect product that they would start expressing less demand for imperfects, for perfect, number one product, and start pushing toward getting a lower value, imperfect product. And I think that actually could happen. I was surprised by the degree to which they feel like they can use this product. And I can see them putting in standing orders for imperfects and starting to pull the price down. So I think we really need to have a conversation about what is a fair price for something that is cosmetically imperfect, particularly the large volume of imperfects that function to the same degree of performance in culinary environments as #1 product that gets a #1 price. So I would just alert you to this concern. I've seen reaction in the food service environments like, well, farmers ought to be pretty much giving this product away because already the costs are already sunk, right? They've already grown it. It doesn't really cost them anything to bring it to market. So the price should be very low. And I would really encourage you to question that. We found with our growers, albeit of a certain size and a certain context, particular part of the country, that the majority of their costs are in fact incurred from the moment that they start harvesting it, right? Right? So maybe a third of their costs are incurred up front to grow it, but most of the costs happen when they either choose or not choose to harvest it, sort it, wash it, package, and move it off the farm. So they can't be giving this stuff away. So just alert, be aware of that issue. I think we need to educate people in the food service environment about that dynamic so that the value of that product is properly recognized and rewarded in the marketplace.
And no, I'm actually really glad you brought that up. I want to speak to that a little bit. And I think there is a real danger, especially with food service, of dropping down the price. In some sense, our investors and different people ask us, what will happen when we do that? And we say, one, we'll have solved the food waste problem when we can do that. But I think in the short term there is a problem, and so we found that there are certain ways that are better. Can better prevent that from happening. And so, for example, we did a pilot with a retail store on the West Coast where we sold separate, as opposed to getting them to accept, different grading standards and take the imperfect produce and sell it with the perfect produce. We separated it out, had it at its own aisle in the produce section for 30% less, its own branding with imperfect and the grocery store. And at the end, so we found there was a little bit of cannibalization of sales of the perfect produce, but overall produce sales were up from before the pilot. And I often find, I get our box delivered home, and for us, for me, it's like, I can eat 4 peaches in summer in a day and not feel bad about it because, it cost me $1 as opposed to, $4. And so I think we really need to focus also on this as an opportunity to increase overall fruit and vegetable consumption, as opposed to, like you said, replacing the perfect produce, because again, a lot of the reason we're doing this work is to provide farmers with extra income. And so that there is that risk if you are starting to replace what people are buying anyway. And I think another thing we're doing now, working with Whole Foods in the West Coast, where we're doing branded grab-and-go bags of produce, so you can get 2-pound bags of mandarins or clamshells of apricots or bags of potatoes and other products. But it's the idea for us is it's going to be in a separate section in the store. Like there's the organic, there's going to be, we want the imperfect section, so you can go there and it's going to be a rotating crop of product that you can trust is going to be 30% less. And it's going to be food that would have gone to waste, and it's going to be of a good quality. And the idea is that you're going to buy that kind of in additional to your normal produce spend, instead of replacing what you're getting because it's rotating, it's specialty. It's not just the potatoes and onions every week. So I definitely think it's a real fear and something to be aware of for all of us as we design models to combat the waste of food that is cosmetically challenged.
I'm going to ask one more quick question, then turn it over. So this is for anyone, and I just want to talk a little bit about the role of federal agencies. We have a lot of our great friends and partners from USDA, EPA, and FDA here, and I think they hold a big piece of this in that they have relationships with farmers. USDA has county offices that farmers are walking into every day. So have any of you used federal programs or benefited from technical assistance, or how could agencies be helpful to you, or what do you see their role being in this?
Yeah, I'll start. For those of you who are gardeners who may have heard of the Master Gardener Program, the USDA has been immensely helpful to AmpleHarvest.org in helping gardeners across the country learn about their ability to deal with food waste and hunger in their own communities. I should also say that the AmpleHarvest.org for the 3rd year in a row is integrated into Feds Feed Families, which is the U.S. government's own food drive. And I think that if Feds Feed Family ultimately expanded where appropriate to incorporate other programs, it could even provide more opportunities there. But across the board, we've been blessed with support from, as you heard, the White House, the USDA, the EPA, Commerce, and a bunch of other agencies who've stepped up and recognized that theoretically 35% of their employees are gardeners and can contribute to reducing food waste and hunger in their own communities. So we've had a very, very tight relationship with the government.
So I think we're going to open it up to you guys now. We have mics up here. Is there someone from the clinic? Great. So any questions from the audience? I think we have about 15 minutes left.
Hi, Joanne. Quick question. You mentioned the processing challenges with the big companies. What about the entrepreneurial opportunities for food, new food companies with all produce?
Yeah, I would love, when you ask about government strategies too, I would love to see the federal government and entrepreneurs and investors, folks that are associated with ReFed, for instance, to really think about how we could ramp up value-added processing for some of these surplus products that are out there, because the volumes are just huge. And I think there's a lot of potential. I think it's also a real challenge, though, because the supply of imperfects and sometimes of surpluses on farms in general tends to be influenced by the weather. It's seasonal. It can be hard to predict. It's hard to run business models around that kind of variability. How do you invest in a processing facility that might only, like in Minnesota, be operating for 8 weeks of the year if you're only dealing with fresh produce of certain types? So I think there's really some room for innovation, for some really creative people to figure out business models that can make this work. And I think it's also encouraging what you're seeing in the food bank and food shelf community, that folks are really thinking about how, for instance, as Karen Hanner said, how do you get the peaches to be canned and into the emergency food system, right, in ways that actually can work economically. And I think it's encouraging that, for instance, in December, this legislation was passed as part of the omnibus spending bill to expand the types of businesses that now can benefit from the tax breaks for food donation, to include farms, independent grocery stores, restaurants, others that are not C corporations. So I think a number of these things are now starting to align to help us figure out how do we connect all these dots in the system. And it really is going to come through collaboration from the farm all the way down to the consumer with smart-minded entrepreneurs and financiers who can connect the dots, make those things happen.
Yeah, and I'll speak to that as well as tie in the state or federal department agency help. So we thought a correctional industry may be a perfect solution to processing of what we call naturally beautiful foods. And because they tend to be pretty labor intensive to handle. They aren't efficient through the machines of which many of these food manufacturers use. So if we could engage the individuals that are in our state's custody in a work and learn environment that is also a stepping stone from, let's say, a Master Gardener program within the walls of a correctional setting, a volunteer work opportunity that's enhanced where they gain skills, meaning that they can choose to be in this work or not, but then also helps reduce the food loss in the state as well as feed the state and benefit the state's budget in both a capital S and a small s, and then give these individuals a sense of purpose, of giving back, and actually that reduces the isolation that many incarcerated feel if they're doing something that has direct impact on the community. And then there's the opportunity for job placement post the work. So, and I'd say our legislators were keen on it. The state corrections department, which is part of the Agency of Human Services, struggled with the concept of all of the work of creating a new industry. So, but I think it's a great option.
So Boston Area Gleaners I'm really waiting for partners to emerge who are going to be able to do more processing. We're looking at doing a pilot with Commonwealth Kitchen this year because we regularly drive off from grade B product because we can't find an outlet for it. We are focused, almost all the produce that we glean is grade A, over 90%, because those are the outlets. That's what food banks require, food pantries, they need grade A product. So But as Teresa said, it's reactive, and processes are set up with contracts and very tight schedules. It's hard to make money in processing, and so they've got to be very efficient. So that's definitely a challenge and one we're looking to build out.
And as Doug just mentioned, sorry, but Commonwealth Kitchen, just for 1 second, like one of the things in California is, for example, it takes a week to get a label approved. You know, you have to get the label approved that has the ingredients and everything, and the typeface is right. So what they've done is they've developed 12 easy recipes that have a lot of the produce that is normally going to waste. So as soon as that are pre-approved, so as soon as a farmer comes in, they can process it and then give that back to the farmer to sell, so it's already ready. So there's small things that can be done, but it needs to be flexible.
I just wanted to follow up quickly on the processing piece. In the work that we did with Beyond Beauty, we also looked at the fresh cut processing industry, you know, the folks that are dicing tomatoes and that kind of thing for salad bars and so forth. And this question about, you know, is the equipment the problem? Like if the zucchini is just too big, will it not go in the machine? And it was really interesting. They basically just said, you know, equipment is not the problem. We'll cut the zucchini in half and it'll go through the machines. And it was really interesting because it was kind of like this balloon that got popped. Like, I mean, they literally said to me, the equipment is not the issue. What we did find was more of a concern for fresh cut processors in our area was the proliferation of SKUs that you might have. If they started having a line of imperfect product or different types of imperfections, you know, too big, too small, whatever it is, that they worry about just the number of slotting components in their inventory management system. So the proliferation of SKUs was a concern for them. And then also for the fresh cut processors, it was a question about supply availability. And even those who have like multi-generational relationships with farms in our areas, the distributors, processors, they really don't know what happens with that imperfect product. It's almost kind of like it doesn't exist. Like the farmers know up one side and down the other how much of that product they have, but the processors just don't see it. It's not part of the conversation. So they do have challenges, I think, that are legitimate around the supply of that product, in part because it's flexible and driven by the weather.
I've got a question about the use of volunteers to run organizations and to actually keep everything going. And I wonder, and I've seen it actually in for-profit organizations which use prison labor to help provide the dairy products or raw materials to produce very wonderful and successful dairy products. But I wonder if there's actually a discussion about this going on, if in fact jobs, even if they're low paying, could be provided for people in the community that need the work, and how much that busts your models, and how active is that conversation?
Can I start?
Yeah, sure.
Mine's going to be the short answer. We have 42 million volunteers out there. So every gardener is their own harvester and transporter. So they are the logistics. And so from our perspective, that's the resource that AmpleHarvest.org can take advantage of. And I think it's one that it serves them emotionally because they want to not have their food wasted. They also get a tax deduction for doing that. I suspect we're going to hear a lot more about other volunteer challenges.
Somebody else.
You know, I think it's for our work in both Gleaning and with the other autonomous organizations that are part of the Gleaning Collective, engaging volunteers is actually the crux of making the impact. I mean, providing people quality, nutritious food is really powerful too, but putting someone in a farm field that maybe they've driven by 20 years and have always seen it from the road, when they stand in that field, they start to ask questions and they start to see it. They'll never see it from the road again. They'll always know what it felt to be in that field. And I think that when we glean, we tend to glean for charitable purposes. It doesn't provide a lot of compensation to the farmer, even if you're creating educated and invested consumers. If we started to serve other sort of markets, I'd like to explore ideas of becoming more of a temp agency. So how do we figure out how to get labor available to the farm if we were turning dollars right back into the farm? But that's a whole nother layer of conversation and discussion. But I don't think that we're displacing jobs by harvesting the food. I think that the jobs aren't either the labor isn't available or it's not affordable enough. And as far as the incarcerated, I think that, I oversaw a lot of I oversaw the crew that worked with us. And so I was able to see the impact it had on the individuals. And I think that was pretty powerful. To run a program like the Vermont Commodity Program with paid staff would put a substantial burden on our organization. So I think we need to rely creatively on volunteer sources, and volunteers aren't always that reliable. So thinking of workforce development programs, when you need available, reliable labor when the food is there. Like, we like to say we serve farms, but actually we serve crops. So we need to be ready when they are.
I'm ready. So in 2010, our budget was $25,000. And since then, we have built out to 5 staff, and they'd probably tell you they have low-paying jobs. But that isn't that funny. But working on that too. But as I'm hoping that as more resource flows to food recovery in general, and looking at this as an actual resource, that I'm able to provide even more jobs. I like that idea a lot, and so yeah.
I would like to hire more people too.
I had a question for you about the Ample Harvest and how you found that your system works in terms of getting pantries a quantity that works for them and not overwhelming them if there's 20 gardeners in one town and they're getting tons of stuff. How do you help moderate that or adjust the service so that you're not overwhelming them, especially smaller pantries?
We don't. Let me start with this. I think if the worst problem a pantry can have is that they have too much food, God bless them. That's not the case throughout much of America, but the tomatoes all do come, or the zucchini all do come at one time. Our job is not to be in the middle of the transaction. Our job is to set up the connection between the gardener and the food pantry and to step back. And then for the rest of the gardener's life, he or she will then be donating their excess. If the pantry ever says, hey, we have too much of something, the pantries can actually come onto their own page on our site and say, we really do want this, or please, we no longer want any of that for us. So there's a feedback mechanism to the community. But our job was simply to say we have an excess supply of food, and we have an excess supply of frustrated gardeners who've seen their food go to waste. Let's unleash the goodwill of the gardeners. Let's unleash the food and let it flow like water behind a dam. It will flow naturally. If there's too much food, again, that's a problem we should all be struggling with. It's not one that we're worried about. These are not farms. By the way, when you're talking about these programs, you're talking about truckloads and truckloads and truckloads of farms. These are people who have smaller quantities of food. I drove here from New Jersey yesterday with a hefty bag of Swiss chard, horseradish, and lettuce I harvested from my garden, and I donated it to a shelter about half a mile from here on my way up. I do that when I travel around the country. Me and 42 million other people are capable of doing that. That's something that's going to serve those people for the next day or so, however long it's going to be. It's not an overwhelming amount, but I think it's the just making sure that where there's waste, that we eliminate the waste. If we have another problem downstream where there's another surplus, somebody else can deal with that. That's not our mission statement. Ours is simply to unclog the waste that's been there now, that no one's noticed.
Right, so sites are able to input their needs a little bit into the system. So
Absolutely. Not only that, they're actually also able to say if they're store-bought items that people want, although that's not our mission, but we've had people say we need baby food or we need stuff like that.
they can even request what it is that they're looking for.
They can put up stuff so that the gardener, when they come to the site, can see any messages. The answer is yes. It's a feedback mechanism from the pantry to the neighbors in the community.
Right.
I think we have time for one more question, or we'll do 2 quick ones there. I know we started a little late.
Thank you. So my question is piggybacking actually on the gentleman's over here about job creation. I work with 40 feeding programs in Connecticut, And for us, it's looking at how processing can be done at a micro level, for example, in the church kitchens that have the equipment, and we have patrons of pantries and soup kitchens that, if they're interested, can be doing that. However, we're hamstrung because if food is donated, we can't sell it. And if we can't sell it, then those folks don't have jobs, and they don't have income, which would help them to not rely on the pantry system as much as they do. So I'm curious if there are any pilots or solutions or anything that's going on that could unlock some of this produce that's being donated and make it into something that can be a market.
I mean, I would say one just like logistical solution is just figure out what the tax donation is that they're taking and pay the farmer wherever the produce is coming from that amount, and then you can sell it. And so I think that's the market. And I think there's a lot of good models too about subsidizing even gleaning programs or other processing where they'll donate 80% of the produce and sell 20% of it, and the income proceeds from the 20% will fund the operations for the other 80%. So I think a lot of it's about just building up demand, and we can talk later too if you want some tips on how to build up demand for a product. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Are you working with prepared food sites or food access sites, like food shelves? What are the 40 sites you're working with?
They're food pantries and soup kitchens that are located mostly in religious organs.
We've been working with a few agencies to minimally process their own food. So when they receive volume that they can't turn over in the raw form, how do they assess their capacity to minimally process to distribute something that is processed?
Generally, we're looking to see how that product can be sold.
For revenue.
I was just going to mention that my boss's bill, the Food Recovery Act, would actually expand the tax deduction to include innovative models. I see Doug right there, like the Daily Table, so that you can sell products for a minimal amount. So that's one option, is expanding it through legislation. I think we have to wrap up. There's just one thing I wanted to ask all of our panel members. If we could go down the line and just provide one action item. I work on the Hill, and so a lot of times, as Shelley mentioned this morning, not a lot gets done, so I like having actionable tasks for people afterwards. So if you could just mention one thing, whether it's go gleaning or try gleaning for the first time, or educating farmers about the tax deduction, or just one piece that folks can go forward with.
Is this a call to action for the Congresswoman or for the audience? For the audience, okay. I'm going to actually give you two. If anybody wants some bling from ampleharvest.org, it's on the table. Please do. The best thing you can do is if you know of a food pantry in your neighborhood or your house of worship, encourage them to sign up on ampleharvest.org. It's free. They don't need refrigeration. They don't need storage, and it's free. Say that part twice. The free part's really important to them. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say if you know farmers who aren't donating, that you talk to them and you tell them about the Good Samaritan Act, make sure they understand that. It can be difficult if there aren't any organizations in the area who provide gleaning service to them like we do. That's really professionally organized. But working with your local growers to help figure out how to make some of that surplus flow without guilt or judgment, because you will get a no if that happens.
I'm going to spin this somewhat away from my work. I think that we need to look at our own personal behaviors with food. If 80% at least is from consumer-facing, if not our homes, where consumer-facing businesses, if not our homes, where we're losing food in this country. I'd rather food stay on farms because it'll feed animals and it'll be fertility and it'll be food once again. So I'd ask each one of you is to think about how you buy food, what you buy. Don't ask the farmer for a cheaper price. Give them a bonus and eat your leftovers.
I would just say next time you're in a grocery store, find the ugly zucchini or the ugly peach and buy it and eat it and enjoy it and make it feel loved.
On a similar note, I would say for those of you who do work with institutions and restaurants, talk with them about using imperfects. Also talk with them about paying a fair price for that product.
Great, let's give them one more round of applause.